I cradled my newborn son in my arms, his tiny fingers curling reflexively around mine. He was perfect, soft, fragile, and utterly dependent on me. Or at least, that's what I was supposed to believe. But something was wrong. His nose was too narrow, his lips too thin. His eyes, a shade of brown too light to match mine, stared up with the unfocused gaze of all newborns. The hair that dusted his scalp was fine and wispy, lacking the dark waves that ran through generations of my family. "Look at him," Claire murmured from the hospital bed, her voice thick with exhaustion and something else. Pride? Relief? "He's perfect." I forced a smile. "Yeah, just doesn't look much like me." Her face tightened for a fraction of a second before she laughed. Too high, too quick. "Oh, come on. All babies look like squished potatoes at first. He'll grow into his features." But she didn't meet my eyes when she said it. The nurses bustled around us, checking vitals, adjusting blankets. One of them, a woman with a too bright smile, glanced between me and the baby and chuckled. "Well, someone must take after Mom. Are you sure you're the dad?" The room froze for half a breath. Claire's laugh was sharp, brittle. "Oh, haha." The nurse blinked, sensing the tension, and hurried away. I looked down at the baby again, at his unfamiliar features, at the way Claire's hands clenched the sheets when I studied him too long, and that's when the seed took root. What if he's not mine? I buried the thought deep, told myself I was being paranoid. But later, when the visitors left and Claire finally slept, I pulled out my phone and searched for paternity tests. The first week home should have been bliss. Instead, every moment felt like walking through a minefield. I watched Claire with our son, her son. My mind whispered traitorously, noticing how she stiffened whenever I lingered too long, how she'd angle her body away when I reached for him, as if shielding him from me. "Did you see that?" I asked one night as the baby yawned, his tiny fist brushing his cheek. "That little dimple when he smiles." "He doesn't have dimples," Claire cut in too quickly. Then, softer, "It's just gas." But I had seen it. A faint indent on his left cheek, just like my brother's. A spark of hope flared, until I remembered Claire's college roommate had dimples too, a roommate she'd stayed with for girls' weekends twice last fall. The doubts grew teeth. At work, my colleague slapped my back. "Congrats, man! Though, gotta say, kid looks nothing like you." He laughed like it was a joke. I didn't laugh back. That night, I scrolled through Claire's Instagram, zooming in on photos from her girls' trip. There, in the background of a brunch pic, a half-empty mimosa glass and a man's hand resting on the table beside hers. When I confronted her, she rolled her eyes. "That's Jason, Sarah's husband. God, you're paranoid." But her phone buzzed constantly now, always face down. She started taking the baby for walks that lasted hours, coming home flushed and avoiding my gaze. Then came the final straw. I found a receipt in her purse for a hotel downtown, dated 2 days before our anniversary. The same day she'd claimed her mom needed help with a leaky faucet. My hand shook as I opened my laptop. It took 3 clicks to order the DNA test. As the confirmation email popped up, Claire called from the nursery, voice sweet as poison. "Honey, can you grab more diapers?" "Sure thing," I lied back. The test kit arrived the next day. I hid it in my toolbox beneath the wrenches she'd never touch. Now I just needed 5 minutes alone with the baby. And for Claire to take one of her suddenly frequent naps. The kit sat in my toolbox for 3 days, burning a hole through the metal. Every time I opened the garage, its presence hummed like a live wire. I just needed 5 minutes. 5 fucking minutes. When Claire wasn't hovering like a guard dog. She was always there. Always watching. "You're so tense," she murmured one night, fingers trailing down my arm as I pretended to sleep. "You should be happy." I almost laughed. Then, on Thursday, Salvation, her mother called. Some crisis with the dishwasher. Claire hesitated at the door, the baby in her arms, her keys jingling. "You'll be okay alone with him?" "We'll manage," I said, forcing a smile. The second her taillights disappeared, I moved. The kit instructions were simple. Swab the inside of the baby's cheek, seal it, send it off. But my hands wouldn't stop shaking. What if I messed it up? What if she came back early? The baby slept soundly in his crib, blissfully unaware. I leaned over him, swab ready, and his eyes flew open. Dark brown. Her eyes. For a heart-stopping second, I thought he'd scream. But he just stared, curious, as I gently pressed the swab against his cheek. His tiny fingers batted at my wrist, and something twisted in my chest. He trusts you. I shoved the thought away. The envelope was addressed, the sample sealed. I drove to the post office myself, sliding it across the counter like it was evidence in a crime. "Overnight delivery?" the clerk asked. "Yes." No turning back now. Claire was home when I returned, her smile sharp. "Where'd you go?" "Just gas." I held up the receipt I'd grabbed on purpose. She hummed, bouncing the baby on her hip. "Funny, your car's not even warm." Ice flooded my veins. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The test would take a week. 7 days of this. Of her watching me, of me watching him, of the silence between us growing teeth. At 3 a.m., my phone buzzed. The lab's automated email. "Your sample has been received?" Beside me, Claire sighed in her sleep, her hand curled possessively around her phone. I closed my eyes. The clock was ticking. The days after sending the DNA sample stretched into an unbearable limbo. Every morning I woke with my stomach already knotted, checking my email before even getting out of bed. The lab's confirmation message haunted me. 5 to 7 business days of purgatory before I'd know for certain whether the child I'd been holding, feeding, and quietly falling in love with was actually mine. Claire moved through our days with a new carefulness, her smiles a fraction too wide, her laughter ringing a note too high. She developed a habit of positioning herself between me and the baby whenever I entered a room, her body language screaming possession. Yet at night, she'd press close in bed, her fingers tracing meaningless patterns on my arm, as if trying to rewrite our history through touch alone. I caught her watching me sometimes when she thought I wouldn't notice. Her gaze would flicker away the moment I turned, but not before I saw the calculation in her eyes. She was waiting too, though for what exactly I couldn't say. The baby was changing daily, his features becoming more defined. People kept saying he looked just like Claire, and every time someone said it, her smile would tighten just enough for me to notice. At his 2-week checkup, the pediatrician joked about how he'd clearly gotten his mother's eyes, and I had to excuse myself to the restroom where I dry-heaved into the toilet. Work became my only refuge. In my office, surrounded by blueprints and contracts, I could almost pretend everything was normal. Then my phone would buzz with another automated update from the lab. Sample processed, analysis underway, and reality would come crashing back. On the 6th day, I came home to find Claire singing to the baby, some lullaby I didn't recognize. She stopped the moment I walked in, her arms tightening around him reflexively. "You're home early," she said, and I could hear the unspoken question. Where had I been? What had I been doing? The results came the next morning while I was shaving. The notification popped up on my phone screen and my razor slipped, leaving a thin red line along my jaw. I stood there with blood trickling down my neck as I logged into the lab's portal, my wet fingers slipping on the touch screen. When the page finally loaded, there were no percentages or probabilities. Just 3 words in bold black type. Not the father. I read them once. Then again. Then a 3rd time. As if the words might rearrange themselves into something less devastating. The bathroom tiles felt suddenly cold beneath my bare feet. Somewhere in the house I could hear Claire talking to the baby, her voice bright with false cheer. I wiped the blood from my neck with a towel, studying my reflection. The man staring back at me looked strangely calm, almost peaceful. The waiting was over. Now there would only be consequences. I printed the results at work. The paper felt heavy in my hands, the lab's official letterhead giving the words an air of finality. I folded it twice and slipped it into my breast pocket, where it burned against my chest like a brand. Claire was feeding the baby when I got home. She looked up with that practiced smile, the one that didn't reach her eyes anymore. "You're late," she said lightly. I was starting to worry. I stood in the doorway, my hand resting on the folded paper. "We need to talk." Something flickered across her face, fear maybe, or relief that the waiting was over. She set down the bottle with exaggerated care. "Okay," she said slowly. "About what?" I pulled out the paper and unfolded it with deliberate slowness, watching her face as I placed it on the kitchen counter between us. She didn't need to read it. The way her breath caught told me she knew exactly what it was. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the baby's soft gurgles from his bouncer. Finally, Claire lifted her chin. "Those tests can be wrong," she said, but her voice wavered. "Not this wrong." My own voice surprised me, calm, almost detached. "Who is he?" She flinched at the directness of the question. Her hands fluttered to her throat, then to the countertop, fingers splaying across the printed results, as if she could erase the words through sheer will. "It doesn't matter. It matters to me." The baby let out a sudden cry, sharp and insistent. Claire moved toward him automatically, but I stepped between them. For the first time, she looked truly afraid. "You don't get to touch him right now," I said quietly. "Not until you tell me the truth." Her composure cracked then. Tears spilled over, streaking her cheeks. "It was just once," she whispered. "A mistake. I never meant his name." She swallowed hard. "Jason," she finally admitted. "Sarah's husband." The name hit me like a physical blow. I'd met Jason at company picnics, shaken his hand, made small talk about football. All while he'd been... The baby wailed again, louder this time. Claire reached for him, and this time I let her. She gathered him against her chest, her tears dripping onto his onesie. I turned away, my hand already reaching for my phone. It was time to call a lawyer. The lawyer's office smelled like leather and money. Thomas Wexler, the best divorce attorney in the city, steepled his fingers as I laid out the facts. His expression never changed, not when I showed him the paternity results, not when I recounted Claire's confession. "Emotional damages," he murmured, making a note. "Fraudulent misrepresentation. We'll go after every penny she made you spend on that child." His pen tapped against the legal pad. "Any joint assets?" "The house," I said, "in both our names." Wexler smiled. A thin, predatory thing. Not for long. I served Claire the papers that evening. She stood frozen in our foyer, the documents trembling in her hands. The baby, not my baby, slept upstairs, unaware his world was about to implode. "You can't do this," she whispered. "Watch me." The next morning, I found her digging through my office files. She jerked back when I entered, papers scattering. "Looking for something?" I asked. Her eyes darted to the safe where I kept the original test results. "You're being cruel," she hissed. "No," I corrected. "I'm being thorough." By week's end, Wexler had filed motions for everything: the house, the cars, reimbursement for medical bills, even the baby shower gifts. Claire's lawyer, some harried public defender, called twice to discuss settlements. I let both calls go to voicemail. Then came the text from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Jason. I met him at a diner near his office. He looked like hell, unshaven, eyes bloodshot. I didn't know," he blurted before I'd even sat down. "About the test, about any of this." I sipped my coffee, letting him squirm. "You knew she was married." He flinched. "She said you were separating." "And you believed her?" Silence. Outside, rain began pattering against the windows. Jason's hands clenched around his mug. "What do you want?" I set down my cup with deliberate calm. "Testimony," I said. "In court. About your relationship." His face went pale. "I can't. My job—" "You will," I said, standing, "or I file a workplace harassment suit against you and your company for fucking my wife at the Christmas party. Security cameras are wonderful things, Jason." The drive home was quiet. The house was dark. Upstairs, Claire's shadow moved behind the nursery door. I poured myself a drink and waited for the storm to come. The first court date arrived with the brittle energy of a coming thunderclap. Claire wore navy blue, the color of trustworthiness, but the dark circles under her eyes betrayed her. She kept glancing at me as we took our seats, searching for cracks in my composure. She wouldn't find any. Her lawyer, a harried woman with too many files in her arms, leaned over to whisper something. Claire shook her head sharply. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with steel-gray hair, skimmed the documents before her. "Mr. Wexler," she said, "your motion for summary judgment on the fraud claim is aggressive." Wexler stood smoothly. "Your Honor, my client was deceived into believing he was the father of a child that was not his. The financial and emotional damages are quantifiable." Claire's lawyer jumped up. Your Honor, my client has been the primary caregiver to a child that isn't his, the judge interrupted. She adjusted her glasses. Ms. Delaney, does your client dispute the paternity results? A beat of silence. Claire's fingers dug into the edge of the table. No, Your Honor, her lawyer admitted. The judge exhaled. Then we proceed on that basis. Claire's breath hitched. Wexler called his first witness, our neighbor, Mrs. Lowell, who testified to seeing Claire and Jason arguing in her car outside our house last November. Then the hotel receptionist, who confirmed Claire's reservation under her maiden name. Each piece clicked into place with surgical precision. When Jason took the stand, he wouldn't meet my eyes. His testimony was halting, but damning. Yes, they'd been involved. Yes, the timeline matched. Claire's face was ashen. The judge didn't even wait for closing arguments. Given the uncontested facts, she said, I'm granting the petitioner's motion for fraud. Ms. Delaney will reconvene next week to discuss restitution. Claire bolted from the courtroom before the gavel hit the desk. Outside, the sky had darkened. I stood on the courthouse steps, the first drops of rain hitting my face. It wasn't over, but the tide had turned. The house was too quiet when I returned. Claire's suitcase stood by the door, half-packed, her favorite sweater draped over it like a surrender flag. She sat at the kitchen island, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea gone cold. You took everything, she said without looking up. I set my keys on the counter. I took what was mine. Her laugh was hollow. The judge gave you the house, the cars, even the fucking savings account. What am I supposed to do? Ask Jason. Her head snapped up at that, eyes blazing. He won't return my calls. His wife kicked him out. She swallowed hard. You ruined us. I leaned against the counter, watching her unravel. No, Claire. You did that all by yourself. She stood abruptly, the stool scraping against the tile. He was just supposed to be fun, a distraction. I never meant to get pregnant, I finished. To trap me into raising another man's child? My voice stayed steady, but something dark coiled in my chest. Did you even consider telling me the truth? She looked away. That was answer enough. Upstairs, her baby, started crying. Claire flinched, but didn't move toward the stairs. You should go to him, I said. Her hands trembled. I don't know how to do this alone. For a moment, just a moment, I almost pitied her. Almost. You should have thought of that before you lied. She grabbed her suitcase then, the wheels rattling against the hardwood as she dragged it toward the door. At the threshold, she paused. Will you ever forgive me? The question hung between us, heavy and useless. I walked past her, up the stairs, toward the nursery where her son, not mine, never mine, was still crying. The door closed behind me. Some questions don't deserve answers.